I have an official biography and then a little tribute to Kyle, a personal biography of our connection to Wyoming Catholic. So first, Kyle Washut, a Wyoming native, has been with Wyoming Catholic College since its inception. Growing up in Casper, Wyoming, he worked in nuclear missile silos and coal mines during his teenage years, receiving an AA in political science and a second in Spanish from Casper College before going to TAC. While in Casper, he studied under two of Wyoming Catholic's eventual founders, Dr. Robert Carlson and Father Robert Cook, and began his journey towards Wyoming Catholic by serving as a dishwasher at the annual Wyoming School for Catholic Thought, which Ron MacArthur and Robert Carlson and Father Cook did together with John Sr. as well. He graduated from Thomas Aquinas College in 2007 with a BA in Liberal Arts and returned to Wyoming and Wyoming Catholic as the inaugural Assistant Dean for Student Life, a position he held until departing in the fall of 2009 to pursue a graduate degree in sacred theology at ITI in Austria, where Charles is now teaching. And he's, well, you all know Charles. While in Austria, he continued to work for the college, coordinating its inaugural high school peak and adult education summer programs, before returning as a full-time professor in 2012. Kyle has taught across the college's curriculum since his return, theology and philosophy, as well as her distinctive trivium and humanities courses. In addition to serving as visiting associate professor of patristics at and ecclesiastical history at St. Cyril and Methodius Byzantine Catholic Seminary in Pittsburgh, he has worked closely with a number of the college's administrative offices, including admissions, advancement, and the Outdoor Leadership Program, OLP. In the fall of 2019, he was named academic dean and served in that capacity for 4 years before being named president in August 2023. I had the great pleasure of meeting Dr. Robert Carlson and Father Robert Cook, who is now Father Simeon Cook. He's his mission, he's in New Mexico, and his mission is to pray for all the priests of Wyoming, I think, or so he's carried on. I met them at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs at a Legatus National Convention, and this was before the college started. And their enthusiasm and their articulate vision was clear then, and has been steadily implemented since. And someone else who met Kyle knew Carlson and Cook and Bishop Ricken, who was the ecclesiastical founder of the college, was my friend Gil Bailey. I co-direct Gil's foundation up in Sonoma called the Cornerstone Forum, and Gil was one of those people at the School of Catholic Thought in Wyoming in those early years, and met Kyle as a teenager. And he said, I first met Kyle while I was giving talks at a summer week gathering of young Catholics in Casper, Wyoming. At the time, Father Bob Cook, now Father Simeon, leading a life of solitude and silence. Bishop Ricken, Father Bob, and Bob Carlson were at the time working to make Wyoming Catholic College a reality. Kyle was a remarkable young man. And with that, Kyle Washut.
Thank you. Excuse me, John. I'm supposed to give the time. Thank you, Alex. All right. Well, thank you, Alex, for that introduction. If you all don't mind, I'm going to be very gauche in California. I'm going to wear my hat because I feel like I can talk more effectively if I'm wearing my hat. All right. So I'm just so thankful to be brought to be able to talk to this illustrious gathering of the Newman Club. And I'm so thankful for Alex for arranging it. I had the pleasure of spending, as Alex mentioned, 4 wonderful years in Southern California when I was an undergraduate. And it is great to come back the weather in general in California in March is a little bit nicer than the weather in the mountains of Wyoming. Though I think it'll probably be blizzarding by the time I get home. But right now it's nice. But all right. Alex had asked me to talk especially about sort of what's the philosophy of education behind Wyoming Catholic College. For those of you who don't know, we do some very distinctive, not to say weird things as part of our formation. All of our students go out and spend 3 weeks in the wilderness backpacking before they crack a book and study. And then the third week we give them an X and say, well, if you want to get home to a shower, you need to find your way out. And then they come out. They then spend an additional 7 weeks beyond that doing various outdoor activities: whitewater rafting, rock climbing, winter camping, digging giant snow caves, and sleeping at the base of the Tetons. And they spend a semester of horsemanship. They do all of that while giving up their cell phones. They come in, they turn in their phone, and they don't get it until they leave. We have no Wi-Fi in the dorms. And then they undertake an intensive 4-year liberal arts, great books education. Now, I know that this group probably has heard a lot of talks about liberal arts, about classical education. I want to talk about the really distinctive thing that underlies what we're doing that I think should underlie all of Catholic education, which is this approach to the wilderness and the approach to the technological fast that we offer. Now, the best way to explain what we're doing really, I think, was said almost over 100 years ago by Our Lady of Champion in Wisconsin. The bishop who founded Wyoming Catholic College, Bishop David Ricken, was also the bishop who, when he was moved from Wyoming, went to Wisconsin and approved the only Marian apparition in the United States. Now, it's an interesting story because Our Lady touched down. She spoke in Wisconsin a year after Lourdes, and hardly anybody talks about her. It was a revelation, a gift that was intended, I think, for a later time. But the message that she gave to Adele there 1 year after Lourdes, we didn't get the dancing sun that we got at Fatima. We didn't get a miraculous spring that healed illnesses. We just got one message, a commission. Our Lady said, gather the children, gather the youth into the wilderness and teach them for their salvation. Gather the youth into the wilderness and teach them for their salvation. And really, that commission bequeathed to the United States 1 year after Lourdes, that commission fundamentally explains what we're doing at Wyoming Catholic College, and I believe what Catholic education, simply speaking, needs to do in some form or another, whether it's done in quite the form we do in Wyoming or not. So first, let's talk about gathering the youth. What are the youth of America right now? Well, we call the youth of America Gen Z. And when you ask about Gen Z, you normally get a list of complaints, right? They did a survey of business managers who gave their first list of complaints about Gen Z in the workplace. And they said, well, Gen Z in the workplace, when we compare them to the millennials and to Gen X and to the various things before them, when we actually compare them, we see they're missing some things, they have some other things. On the one hand, they come more technically prepared with technical specialized training than any generation has come into the workplace. They have in some ways been getting specialized training for their jobs since at least high school, if not before. But when they come in, the managers note they don't have great negotiation skills. They don't have any public speaking skills. They can't really take constructive criticism well. Now, admittedly, I find it hard to take constructive criticism, but you know, everyone does. But they're saying that fundamentally what this generation is missing is what we call the soft skills necessary to flourish in the workplace. So they have spent all of their time training in the really technical, precise skills, and then find themselves unable to work when they're actually with their colleagues. A Halliburton executive was complaining to me that they hire these brilliant engineers with better engineering training than they've ever had in the history of engineering training, and they send them out into the rigs to work with the toughs, and they can't do it. They can't communicate to the guys that are out there on the rigs. They can't respond to the inclement weather. They might know exactly what is to be done, but they don't have the leadership skills and the maturity to translate their technical know-how into the workplace. All right, so that's the first complaint. We've invested a lot in technical training for a job, and on average, managers are complaining the kids don't have the kind of skills that we presumed because we stopped teaching them. But there's a worse complaint about the youth that comes up, which is the mental health crisis. We have record numbers of young people, 17 to 24, struggling with anxiety, prone to being self-critical, less resilient, struggling with depression, suicidal thoughts, etc. It is an actual mental health epidemic. When you talk to workplaces, when you talk to colleges, they're saying we can't keep up with the problems that are plaguing the mental health of Generation Z. And the third thing that gets noted about Generation Z is what Ted Gioia called in a recent article the dopamine addiction. And this dopamine addiction, I think, actually is what underlies the complaints about the workplace and complaints about mental health that we're hearing. Namely, we have created a civilization where we addict our young people to their screens on their smartphone. And we give them bite-sized pieces of addictive entertainment for the sake of getting sales, which are fueled by lust and avarice, by and large. All right? The average youth from 17 to 24 spends 7 to 8 hours on their screen recreationally every day. And what they mean when they say that is they're spending time on Instagram, TikTok, and messaging apps. All of the things, if you think about it, the average length of time you need for TikTok is 30 seconds. The average length of time you need for Instagram is to be able to look at a picture or see a quick reel, and you send a quick text. We are doing bite-sized, addictive, short pieces of communication that, as documented, actual addiction, that make you less satisfied when you watch it over and over again, give you a shortened attention span, and then lead to mental health crisis and an inability to communicate in complex, changing environments in the workplace. All right, now when I say all of that, I don't mean to be a middle-aged guy being grumpy about kids these days that are on my front lawn. I am just trying to highlight a real difficulty that is distinctive to this generation, but not completely distinctive to this generation. While it characterizes Generation Z, it also could characterize what we'll call Generation Alpha, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, when they fell, had everything they possibly needed, and they blew it. There's a story. There's a snake involved and some fruit, and we all know the story. But the consequences of it is Adam and Eve ended up fundamentally doubting themselves, doubting the goodness of God, and alienated from the world around them. They didn't have meaningful relationships. They weren't able to communicate effectively. They were trying to hide from God, and they felt like the world was out to get them, which, after the fall, it was. Okay. But their response to that, we're told, was to make fig leaves. Right? Fig leaves were what we'll call the first technology. Okay? Now, they needed a technology, and the proof of they needed technology is that God gave them animal skins. God gave them clothing afterwards. But the first technology that Adam and Eve invented for themselves was camouflage. Right? Was a way to pretend like they hadn't fallen, a way to blend into the background of the garden, not to relate to each other, to hide from each other, to hide from God, and to kind of blend into the natural world and insulate themselves from the natural world. Wendell Berry, when he talks about these two different, this kind of technology, he says this is the kind of technology that we think of with roads as opposed to paths. Think of a path. I'm growing up on a in the Wyoming country, a path is, sort of what happens naturally when you figure out what's the best way to meander through a mountain or by a stream to get from one place to another. But you're fundamentally in relationship with the stories that come before you, with the land around you, and you're responding to it in the best way possible. A road is defined by a kind of hyper-focus on efficiency. The best way to understand it, you drive across the I-80. You don't actually realize that you're in a different state. It all looks the same. There's giant big box stores, there's semis going, you're going at 80 miles an hour. You don't have any experience of the place. The road's goal is to insulate you from the world around you and make it the most effective way of, in this case, achieving some kind of profit or some kind of pleasure. Which is a way of saying that when left to ourselves, fallen humans create a technology that insulates them from God, insulates them from each other, insulate themselves from the interaction with the real world, for the sake of making lots of money and getting lots of pleasure. Getting pleasure, having money, not a bad thing. We're all in favor of it. But we're not wanting to do it in such a way that's hiding from authentic relationship, hiding from a real relationship to the natural world, and hiding from God. All right, so when we complain about Gen Z not knowing how to relate to the workplace, not knowing how to relate to each other, struggling with mental health, moving toward increasingly an a-religious generation, we need to realize that fundamentally we're just talking about what it means to be a fallen man or a fallen woman. The struggle with sin, exacerbated by technology, which we've been doing since fig leaves, now the Tower of Babel, and now a cell phone. But God's response to the fall of Adam and Eve was to put them into the wilderness. The wilderness is a really interesting thing. Right? The wilderness is not the Garden of Eden. But the wilderness is a place that on the one hand lets you know, like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not at my final destination. I'm not in a place that's completely comfortable. But on the other hand, is designed to get you to the place you're supposed to be. So we're also familiar with the story of Adam and Eve that we don't realize how amazing it is that God responds the way he did. He could have put Adam and Eve in some hole in the ground, locked them up, and thrown away the key. But instead, he puts them in the wilderness. He puts them on a path where they're supposed to be educated and brought back into relationship with him. And so the wilderness, as the place of healing education, actually becomes the founding motif for Christian education. When we're fallen, when we're broken, God takes us to the wilderness to bring us back to right relationship with each other, with the world around us, and with himself. And how does he do that in the wilderness? Well, on the one hand, he does it by purging. Right? When you're out in the wilderness, it's cold or hot. You're thirsty or hungry. There's a lot of discomfort that happens, a lot of challenges that you face that make you give up your attachments to false idols or lies or sins that you have. Now, it's not a pleasant way of detaching. We're told the Israelites, when they're wandering in Egypt, thought about killing Moses pretty regularly. Wish they were back in Egypt. Right? But nevertheless, that hard work, that experience of reality, that experience of real consequences, purges us, makes us give up sinful habits that we had. That's why, from the beginning, Christian monks would run to the wilderness. They would say, if I want to focus on forming real, authentic relationships with other people, with the world around me and with God, I need to go to the wilderness to give up my attachments. So the first reason for Christian education need to be in the wilderness is because we're surrounded by a mess. And part of that wilderness that Christian education invites us to is to give up the technological attachments we have. No longer to fig leaves, but now especially to cell phones, to the smartphone. The addiction to the smartphone. Give it up. Take a break. Give up the attachments to envy, to avarice, to, we can list probably every one of the cardinal sins that is characterized by our attachment to social media. Give it up. Not forever, but as a fast, as a break, as a way to retool and open yourself to deeper education. So that's what we ask our students to do. They give up the cell phone. And in giving up the cell phone, in going out into the wilderness, they discover, oh my goodness, they're oblivious to the world around them. They've been ignoring it. They avoid conflict. Right? And all of a sudden you can avoid conflict because your roommate, your tent mate, read the map wrong, you followed him, and now you're 3 hours late and you're away from camp, it's raining, you're starving, and you have some words to share. Right? If you're in the front country, you might not share those words. But now you're starving. And if you don't share those words, you're not going to eat tonight. And so there's real consequences. Conflict management comes up. Right? Or it's really cold. You've been raining for 12 hours. It's been raining for 12 hours. You're getting hypothermic. You had to ford a river. It's a real true story. What do you do to talk about the real crisis facing you? Because you were 3-4 days away from civilization. This person may end up with hypothermia. As we're telling this story, our Nigerian chaplain says, "What's hypothermia?" And the student says, "Well, it's what happens if you get so cold that you die." And the chaplain says, "Is that something that happens? What have I come to?" And he gets really terrified. But this point, you respond to a real crisis, a real need. You have to communicate. You have to deal with whatever attachments or whatever attraction to comfort you might have. You've got to leave that behind and solve it. Okay. So the wilderness is a place of purging, but also a place of growth and virtue. Once you leave aside those attachments, and now you're really concerned for the person struggling with hypothermia. Or the young man when you're summiting a 14,000-foot peak and a boulder rolls over the top of him and you think, oh my goodness, he's going to die. And you're now a 20-year-old that coordinates a helicopter evac at 13,000 feet. Miraculously, the young man's fine. But your response, the virtue that you're invited to, the leadership, the strength you're invited to in the wilderness, is incredible. So the wilderness is not just a place of purging, but a place of growth and virtue. And the wilderness lastly becomes a place, we're told in sacred scripture, of encounter with God. That having left behind the sinful attachments, having grown in virtue, there's that moment of silence when you can hear the voice of the Lord. Whether that's like Elijah has when he goes out into the wilderness, Moses when he summits the mountain, this moment of encounter, we're able to hear the truth about who you are, about the nature of reality, and about how you should relate to each other. So Christian education begins in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, Our Lady says, gather the youth into the wilderness to teach. St. Cardinal Newman says about teaching that the church has 3 modes of teaching. A Benedictine mode, one of immersing people in reality. He says it's a kind of poetic education, where you come to know the world around you by experience, first and foremost. And you learn to know the world by a kind of love, a kind of familiarity, a kind of sympathy. And from that Benedictine mode of knowing, St. Cardinal Newman says, the Christian education proceeds to a Dominican mode of knowing. That's the one we're maybe more familiar with in this room, the great books education, the careful, reflective reading of philosophy, history, literature, and discussion and seminar method, which we employ. But that mode of education arises out of a deep sympathy, a deep relation with the world around you, this immersive poetics education. And then from that reflective education, Cardinal Newman says, there's an Ignatian mode of education, the practical skills, the way to communicate what you know, the way to lead, the way to inspire people. And again, that arises out of the reflective Dominican mode of knowing, which arises out of the immersive, poetic mode of knowing. And we see what happens if you cut one of those off from the other. If you only focus on technical skills and how to be effective and efficient, you end up with a bunch of Generation Z who don't have the soft skills of how to be in a community and a relationship. If you only focus on how to think very, very carefully and disciplined and philosophically, and you don't cultivate a deep love of the world around you and friendship, or an ability to share it, you turn into an egghead, to use the technical phrase. Okay. So we teach the need to teach poetically, philosophically, and practically. Or as a Benedictine, as a Dominican, as a follower of St. Ignatius. I'm avoiding the word Jesuit because that has negative connotations. And we teach for the sake of salvation. Why do we, as Christians, think that education is a spiritual work of mercy? It's always listed as one of the spiritual works of mercy. But it's listed as one of the spiritual works of mercy not just because, hey, through education you can get a good job and therefore feed the hungry. It's listed as one of the spiritual works of mercy because fundamentally it heals a desire in the soul. A desire to know the truth about reality. A desire to know the truth about yourself. A desire to know the truth about God. And so Christian education is teaching for the sake of salvation. The salvation of the person who receives the education, but also the salvation of the person that educated individual will encounter. The education is supposed to be fruitful. The education is meant to be shared. St. Augustine of Hippo says that if you have something and you can share it without having less of it, you don't really have it until you share it. Okay, that sounds very complicated. It's a very Augustine kind of phrase. But here's what it means. Here's an example. Jokes. You don't acquire knock-knock jokes for the sake of knowing that you know knock-knock jokes. You learn knock-knock jokes for the sake of telling your kids and torturing them with how terrible your dad jokes are. Right? You know jokes for the sake of sharing them. And if you learn a joke and you never tell it, you don't really get what a joke is for. Right? Like, I got this collection of jokes. Can I hear one? No. Like, okay, yeah, I don't think you understand what a joke's for. Right? There are things like that. There are goods like that. Unlike cookies, right? If I share my cookie with someone across the table, I get less cookie. But if I share the joke, I actually have it more. Christian education is a thing like that. If I share it, I actually have it more than before I shared it. And so if we're committed to educating our young people for salvation, part of what that means is our young people are going to share the education they have. Now, they can share it in one of two ways. When I was studying philosophy for the first time, I came back and I shared my knowledge with my father. And my father said it would be really good if I could get kicked by a horse once in a while before I shared all my philosophical knowledge. Right? There was a little bit of knowledge puffs up that St. Paul's concerned about, right?
So you're in favor of corporal?
I'm in favor. Well, my father certainly was. Yeah. Kyle, go milk the cow. Yeah, and see how that goes for you. Right. The way we want to educate our young people to share what they have is not so they come across as arrogant know-it-alls. We want to equip them to share the education they have as people who have fallen in love with the thing they've learned and are sharing it the way you share a joke, as a good you treasure with the people you're sharing it with. And while we do a lot of great things at Wyoming Catholic College, we can't change the fact that our graduates are only 22. And so at times they still come across as arrogant know-it-all. We can't fix that. But for the most part, I think our graduates do come out having fasted in the wilderness, having reflected with their friends, that they have this good as a good they just want to share and delight with. And so they come out, and over half of our students go into teaching for at least some amount of time, because they want to share this. Our students go into religious life. Our students are having large Catholic families, because the good of the life in the wilderness and their education and their reflection is something they want to share. And they're very capable of doing it. They have leadership skills. They're able to articulate it well. They've been in the wilderness, they've been purged, they've grown in virtue, they've reflected on it, and they can share it. But also the thing we're doing is just fundamentally fruitful. We ourselves are committed that we want to share it more broadly. There's only 200 kids a year that are lucky enough to come to Wyoming Catholic, and I think they're really, really lucky. Really lucky to go into the wilderness. But if this is an education for salvation, if this is the kind of thing that we're doing because it's a spiritual work of mercy, a way of sharing in the redemptive work of Christ, we want to figure out ways to share that more broadly. St. John Chrysostom, in the 4th century, in Antioch, which was, a bustling metropolis, a little bit more like LA than like Wyoming, preached to his flock. He said, look, you want to figure out how to be good Christians in this bustling metropolis of Antioch, which is the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. He goes, what do we do? He says, well, outside Antioch, there's the mountains. And he said, go to the mountains. Go to the place where those mountain dwellers are, those monks who live in the wilderness. Go and stay a while with them. Breathe their air. Leave beside your rich metropolitan life for at least a few days. And then return from those mountains and bring them back with you into the city. At Wyoming Catholic College, we have 200 kids that get to live in the mountains like the desert dwellers. They get to breathe that air full time. But we are constantly trying to figure out what are ways we can invite other people into those mountains for a shorter amount of time. To give up their phones for at least a few days. To go ride a horse, to go look at the stars, to go sing some songs. Is it a week-long backpacking trip? Is it just a little trip into the wilds of Wyoming? So that that air can feed into the rest of your Christian life, the rest of your Christian education. The thing we're doing with gathering the youth into the wilderness is something that every adventure of Christian education needs to do. Whether that's St. Monica's Academy, which I was just hearing was awarded a Cardinal Newman Society recognition, whether that's some elite high school in another elite high school in Southern California or New York City, or another college, all of us need to in some ways be figuring out how do we bring our youth into the wilderness to let them breathe the air of this mountain, to give up their phones, and to bring that wilderness air back into the education they're undertaking for their salvation and the salvation of those around them. That's what we're doing at Wyoming Catholic College. And that's, I think, what every Christian education needs to be focused on. Gather the youth into the wilderness to teach them for their salvation. Thank you so much.
Q&A?
Great. No, just...
I have a question. When you send these young kids up to the mountain and the boulder fell down, how do they summon the helicopter for medical?
That's right. That's right. Smoke signals. No, that's right. That's right. We do it. We have to have sat phones, right? We have to rely on technology.
Oh,
Yeah, that's right.
so it's a kind of an artificial go to the...
That's right. That's right. Well,
It's like the scoutmaster carries a gun.
well, we know
Yeah,
about Boy Scouts here. We've done...
or like Adam and Eve needs some kind of equipment in the wilderness, right? The Lord doesn't say, hey, no fig leaves, go be naked. Right? He gives them a different kind of technology. Yeah, that's right.
You have them go down and visit the Minuteman Museum and kind of acquaint themselves with the Cold War.
You know, we have not sent them to the Minuteman. In the senior year, we do talk about the Cold War a fair bit. Yeah, we talk about that era of the emergence and the question of the emergence of, it's the American culture class, which begins with the founding and goes through the story of the Cold War. Yeah.
It's better to win and then write the history.
That is absolutely right. That is absolutely right.
This isn't really a question, an observation, that Christ himself went into the
He did. He did.
For a reason.
Yep. Yeah, everyone is an essential part of Christian education, it seems to me. Whatever way we do it is an essential part. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Trip over you. Oh, it's the table. It is. We're about 3 hours south of 3.5 hours south of Yellowstone.
Like on the western fringe of the state?
Yeah. So if Yellowstone is about right here.
The corner.
Yeah, right. And you go down. There's the Wind River Mountains, and you go down about 3 hours, and tucked into the Wind River Mountains is Lander, Wyoming.
It must get a little freezing there every day.
Not every day, but for a number of days during the winter, for sure. Yes, yeah, yeah. So even living an urban life in Lander, Wyoming, is a little bit more rustic than urban life in LA. That's for sure. Yeah.
Oh, you must live in Landers.
Yes, I do.
Oh, I gotta get out there. Never been to Wyoming.
I'm a fan.
Is the curriculum similar to Aquinas?
It is similar to Thomas Aquinas.
Math and
While Thomas Aquinas has 8 semesters of mathematics and 8 semesters of lab, we do those alternating, and so it's not quite as intensive in the math and sciences, though what you do ends up engaging with modern math and science a little bit more explicitly, I think, at times. Yes.
So you began by speaking about some of the skill set,
Yes.
or lack thereof, depending on
Yeah.
which category. When you receive these students before they go out to the wilderness, what sort of experience or preparation do you find they have, and how long does it take to get them up to speed, and what is that experience like?
Yeah, so. Some of them come to us as Eagle Scouts. Some of them come to us as never having seen a tent, aside from at a homeless shelter in the downtown district, right? And so there's a range of experience. Some of them have never seen snow, and so when it snows on them on their August backpacking trip, it's a rough shock, right? We give all of them a foundational amount of training. They all spend 3 days doing a wilderness first aid training. We teach them the basics of packing the pack, reading the maps, etc. And if you're a particularly good, let's say you come and I know how to read my topographic maps, I know how to pack, I grew up backpacking. You're still out there with a group of 12 other men or women that you've got to figure out how to communicate with. And that's the soft skill. Doesn't matter the technical know-how you have. We need to give you the technical know-how. But the soft skill is the essential piece that you need to learn. Yeah.
Do you think the college could help rehabilitate homeless people to learn valuable skills?
So I will say I think outdoor backpacking is actually great for everyone. We have done some work with not with the homeless, but with some inner city youth, and it's been really transformational.
That's good.
Yeah.
Do you have any intern programs with companies? And the other thing, is there any shop programs there where people just learn basic, skills, kind of trade type
Sure.
stuff?
So one of the things we do, so because we're convinced education is a spiritual work of mercy, we're also convinced it's the kind of thing that should be accessible to everyone, which means we're constantly trying to figure out how do we make this affordable. Private Catholic education, how to make it affordable. One of the ways we make it affordable is by hiring our own students to do the actual concrete work of maintaining the school. So that can be working in the mechanic shop, maintaining our van. That can be doing the landscaping. That can be doing the carpentry. And that means sometimes we don't always get the quality of work that we'd like, but that there's also times when we get a real learning process, and they're learning it, and we're able to then connect them, in the small town we are, to people in the trades for summer work and be able to maintain it. It's not a sort of formal, explicit, hey, everyone has to do this many hours, but the students that want to learn are really able to learn in the trade.
We did a family vacation, 2 years ago or so? We passed through Landers, and we actually met some of the students there at Wyoming Catholic. But kind of piggybacking off the last question there, I don't remember if it was Montana or Wyoming, but there was a shortage of like wool shearers. And that'd be kind of interesting to see if that's what you guys will do to like rehabilitate that type of trade, something to offer to students. Because it seems like there's quite a demand for it across the country, not just in the region.
I agree. I think this is one of the areas that I'm excited to see how it develops, both as a Wyoming boy who's got various other contacts, taking over the college. See what are the connections to other folks we can do to grow out. Now, I want to stress, we're thinking the education we're doing, that wilderness formation, that kind of reflective reading like at Thomas Aquinas, is just good for its own sake. But again, we expect it to, if we can give avenues for them to go back into traditional agricultural work or into trades or into various other things and figure out ways we can do that, that just seems like the fulfillment and the fruitfulness of the education that we see. Yes?
Apart from the academic requirements of the school, what metrics are used to evaluate those intrinsic features like relating to people and showing leadership skills? Is there a metric for that, or is it something that an evaluation?
Yeah, so less a metric, more concrete things that we have. So over the 3 weeks, the 2 leaders for the outdoor trip, one of them is a current student, one of them is a graduate of the program. And they have various points that they're noting on how does the person respond. We have various areas that we rate. One of those is their response to adversity and challenges. How does this person respond? And there's a scale that they have, right? Did the person sit down and cry? And completely unsuccessful, and there's some people that get that mark. Right? Is the person, overly aggressive, or is the person able to actually figure out some way to successfully get it? And there's a ranked scale on that. There's what's the person like for toleration, response to danger, and management of risk? What's the person like in conflict management? Are they able to successfully resolve conflicts? What's the person like in terms of expecting, projecting future challenges and predicting and things along those lines? What are they like in communication? So those are metrics that come up on the 3-week trip. Those also get evaluated by the students on their week-long trips every week subsequent to their 3-week trip. When they go on a week-long trip, seniors, freshmen, juniors, sophomores. At the end of that week, they fill out a note of just sort of as a team, how did I do on these areas? At 2 points during the semester, this may be way more detail than you need, I don't know. At 2 points during their year, in their sophomore year and then during their senior year, they go back and they read those evaluations. And then they talk to each other about them in a small group and see, how have I grown? When I was a freshman, these were my marks. Okay, now I'm a sophomore. How did I do? And the entire sophomore class is gathered and they break into small groups and they review them. And then as seniors, they do that again, going back over their years. And so there, I think we're able to track pretty clearly, like signs. Again, are these absolute hard metrics? No, but they're real measures, real ways of reflecting on how were we doing with tolerance for adversity, how are we doing at communication, how are we doing at conflict management. And we see a pretty steady growth throughout the 4 years. Yes?
Mike?
No, oh, sorry, okay. Good.
Where are most of your students coming from? As far as the region and or families.
Yeah, so in the early years, the number one state where we had students from was California. I think that's in part because you all have had 50 years of hearing about the good of classical education and we're more disposed to it. Thomas Aquinas College and great academies like St. Augustine's or St. Monica's have disposed folks to it. Recently, more recently, we have the number one concentration of students comes from Texas. Texas. Now that's partly because there are more young people in the South, in the southern conservative states, more young people at the ages of 18 than there are anymore in Colorado and California. The more blue states, we're just seeing a demographic cliff. And so we're seeing more young people come from places like Texas and after Texas, Florida. Regionally, aside from any one state, we get a decent chunk from the Rocky Mountain West, but not the majority of students. At this point, we've got students sort of ranged from. The other major mark that we note is roughly 50 to 60% in any given year of our student body is from a homeschooled family.
that makes sense.
We went to visit your school
Okay.
about 3 years ago when our son was entering into college. We went out there to visit to see what it was like, and it was really beautiful out there. The state, and the town, we really fell in love with it. But it was such a new thing. We thought it was just stepping out too far,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But it was. I mean, I'm glad you're doing well.
Yeah, it's a pioneer thing, right? I'm the youngest college president at the youngest accredited Catholic college in the country, right? So we're very much on the young scale of things. And I tell folks, generally speaking, who are we looking for? We're looking for the kind of young person that would have signed up to go on the Pony Express 100 years ago, right? Like the pioneer spirit, the one that really wants the challenge. If you want a more staid, established school, there's great schools to go to. But if you're ready for the adventure and want to be a trailblazer, that's who we're looking for. Yeah.
Do you get other vocations?
So, at this point we have 380 graduates, and we have, 5 students in active seminary, 1 ordained a priest, 1 ordained a transitional deacon, and 6 consecrated religious, I believe. So, yes.
I was wondering, how long has the school been in existence?
So we took our first students in 2007, so 17 years.
You are co-ed?
Yes.
Okay. Have you done studies on your entering freshmen on about such problems as anxiety, depression? I mean, do you do any kind of screening?
We don't have a formal.
When they graduate?
Yeah, we don't do that. The only formal screening we have is for going on the 3-week trip. We ask if there's any record of anxiety or depression that would make us worried about sending you near a cliff away from civilization for some length of time. But we don't have sort of a close the loop of seeing does that decrease by their senior year. We have, like every school, I think, found that we have an increased demand for counselors. Like that's across the country. I think the rate of increase for us is not maybe as overwhelming as it is for other schools, but I don't have formal numbers on that. We don't have that study yet. One of these days, my student life office is going to do that. Yeah.
One more question. Is there a metric, or how do you? Because I've noticed that a lot of the I'll say children or kids that go to these schools, they date.
Yep.
A lot of them date, and a lot of them marry young, right out of school. And I think it's actually a good thing, because they're both like-minded and they're starting to build big families again.
Right.
So what is the percentage or metric that you see in that?
Right. Yeah, so this is one of the things I've been trying to we send out an alumni survey every year, and I've been trying to keep up with how many alumni children do we have. And that is almost an impossible number to keep up with, right? I get a number in May, and then the number goes up relatively quickly. We had our first graduates were in 2011, and of those families that got married, the average family size for those graduates from 2011 is 5. Which is
So I have a few children that went to John Paul Catholic.
Okay.
Same type of thing. And my children are young. They're still young. But they get invites for weddings all the time. So-and-so is married. They met in school, and they're already building their families young, really young. And I think that's a really good thing.
Right. Yeah, I'll say the other thing is we have at this point, our average. So from that first class, right, they've been married for roughly 10 years. Some of them married right out of graduation. Some of them married a couple of years after graduation. And the number they say is you want to look for after 5 years that the risk of divorce significantly decreases. We have no divorces in that first class. So that they've got again. Is it an absolute cure? No. In society, where we're broken, we're fallen, I think it will happen that we will have situations where there's tragically divorces among some of the student body and things like graduates. But I do think that when you compare the rates of marriage and the rates of family size amongst our graduates, as with probably any number of other great Newman College schools. Now, you're going to find that is remarkably higher than the average rate, the average age of marriage, which is getting later and later in the general population, even amongst self-identifying Catholics. That amongst self-identifying Catholics, there's not a distinctive difference between the age of marriage from the general population. The average age of marriage for self-identified Catholics is around 28, I believe is the last study I saw, which is also what we see on the average age of marriage for the society, and that age is steadily getting older and older as we go. Amongst our students, we're getting, again, married right out of college or within a couple of years from that very often. Yes?
Well, two questions. What's the size of your student body, and what percentage of the ones who come as freshmen graduate?
Great. So we are at 185 right now, which is a little bit ahead of, Thomas Aquinas 20 years in. They did a lot of trailblazing for us. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. I think we're larger than they were at 20 years in, but we're about 185, short of 20 years in. And our 5-year graduation rate, we measure the 5-year, is at 80%. The reason we measure 5 years is if you fail one class, you have to repeat that year, and so you often get a number of students either taking a gap year or repeating a year, and so we want to track that 5-year, and that's 80% compared to the national 5-year retention, which is at 65%, I believe.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Oh,
One more question. Well, not so much a question, but I talked to I was marveling at, I think that 3-week backpacking trip was not necessarily designed to break kids, I don't know, 2007, you probably weren't thinking about breaking people free from cell phones.
No.
Because the smartphone wasn't really around.
Right.
But it's not an easy habit to break, and I was noting that the psychologists say it takes 3 weeks to form and 3 weeks to break a habit. And when you go back in the mountains, all the other great virtues of being those beautiful mountains and all that, you see, the kid, it's not like he just turns his phone over. It doesn't matter. He just can't use it out there. It doesn't work, right? So it's a way of weaning them off in 3 weeks. Because I don't know that you could start a school and walk in day one in the classroom and have them turn their phones off. I don't think all the students would do it.
You get the jitters very quickly. Yeah, that's right.
You would have anxiety.
Withdrawal. That's right.
You would. So I think it's wonderful how that worked out.
It is. It is a providential moment. And it is the case that we had someone walk into our coffee shop and he said, "This feels so weird. What's going on?" And his wife said, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, I don't know. It just feels weird in here." She goes, "Well, you mean like, what's it feel like?" Because I don't know. I feel like I'm back in college, like in the 90s. And she goes, "Yeah, that's because none of them have phones. They're actually, it's like a coffee shop from the 90s." And he was so inspired by that, he actually started a group called Humanality. Humanality, which is, it's fundamentally a scholarship organization intended to convince college kids to give up their phones. And they have various 12-step programs to get there. Seriously, it's a long progression, right? But they have to do this step program. First, turn your phone to grayscale. Then don't take it into church. Then don't take it when you eat. Then try not to sleep with it. Right? There's this nice slow progression because they don't have a kind of 3-week habit-breaking period. But yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you. I'll keep that.
Do you know a student there, Grace?
Quick report from Vice President Mark Padilla.
Last Grace
month we had Dr.
Kleinfelter, yes.
So that's a good friend.
And so now we've had another month of education.
My daughter is very
Gentlemen, there is hope.
A couple of years.
Right?
All right.
There's a shift going on. Dr. Alex and I 2 weeks ago were at the CCC, California Catholic Conference of Bishops over in Oakland with 4 bishops. Bishop Barber, the host bishop, Bishop Mark Trudeau from San Pedro region,
Bishop Cantu from San Jose, and Bishop Daly, who's in charge of Catholic education for the USCCB, United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. And in this conference, 6 months ago, working with Mike Alexander on school choice in the state of California, they would have nothing to do with us. But over the course of these 3 days, 2 weeks ago, that's what we're talking about here in the state of California. Furthermore, schools like St. Monica's Academy and Holy Innocents and St. Augustine, they were the outliers. They wouldn't want to talk with them. On the third day of this conference, they were talking about this as an alternative way of renewing Catholic education, not only here in California, but throughout the United States. So what's going on in Wyoming and what's going on at my trade school and what's going on in these other schools, it's happening, gentlemen. It's happening. So it was beautiful to be there. And then, you've got Dr. Alex Lassard. What he's doing is he's doing like further education for us adults in a normal parish setting, sponsored by Mr. Alexander. And here's just a little something on this. It says that the educational systems have become increasingly technological and pragmatic, very specialized, right? Undermining the long-standing emphasis on liberal learning and spiritual reflection that were hallmarks of the Christian humanism that created it. Catholic education was a hallmark of Western civilization, and has been separated from our schools here in America and throughout the Western hemisphere. And it's time to gain it back. And programs like that, and programs like these high schools and other things that are going, Thomas Aquinas, it's changing. It's changing. And so, gentlemen, back these schools up, and however you can, send your grandkids, your children, go to their gala. St. Monica's is coming up in a couple weeks. Greg Caller's wife is running that gala over there. I mean, whatever it is we do to support it, know that it's happening, and there's a turn. There's a turn. Whereas here in California, I don't know that we'll ever win a ballot initiative. So what they were talking about 2 weeks ago, federal choice. Because it's happened in 12 states throughout the United States. So if Trump does win, that's one of his top priorities. And so this could really happen. At this convention, there was only 150 of us. There was a significant amount of lobbyists, right? Because they're smelling the money. They're smelling the money that if it goes to this school choice, there's something to be said there. So we're there, gentlemen. We are there. So just keep praying, keep hoping, and help your local institutions that are having a renewal of Catholic education here.
Excellent. All right.
This book is The Crisis in Western Education. So right now we're doing a developmental class on this right now. This is wonderful. This is really wonderful. I've got a couple here. I brought them for my staff, but if anyone wants it.
We're going to have a blessing from our chaplain, Father Pryor, and then we'll say the Salve.
Yes. Really inspired the same tradition. Super boss, Mania, sempre.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus, exules Filii Eve, a Jesus speramus, gementes serpentes, in hac lacrimarum vae. Ea ergo, advocata nostra, illos tuos, misericordias oculos, ad nos converte. Benedictum, benedictum fructus night, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Good night.
That's all right.
Don't forget Good Shepherd, too. Yes, don't forget about that, right?